0-100 to 0-45. 27 kills. That number, etched into the personal tally of a German fighter ace, represented a career of precision, aggression, and survival in the brutal skies of World War II. It was a tally that brought him to the cusp of Germany's highest military honor, the Knight's Cross. But on December 20, 1943, high above the ravaged landscape of northern Germany, the opportunity for that 28th kill presented itself in a form so broken, so utterly helpless, that it forced a choice. A choice between duty and a deeply held personal code. What would a decorated enemy pilot do when faced with a target that offered no glory, only slaughter? 0:45 to 3 o'clock. Our central character is Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, a German fighter pilot and ace with Jagdgeschwader 27, JG-27, later Jagdverband 44, JV-44. Born on August 21, 1915, in Amberg, Bavaria, Stigler's passion for aviation began at age 12, soloing in gliders and flying biplanes by 1933. Before joining the Luftwaffe in 1940, he flew for Deutsche Lufthansa, the precursor to Lufthansa. His father, a World War I pilot and observer, had instilled in him a profound respect for the Knights of the Air and a strict code of honor. Never shoot a man in a parachute, and fight with restraint, targeting the machine, not the man. His older brother, August, also a pilot, died in a Junkers Ju-88 crash in August 1940, deepening Franz Stigler's resolve but also fueling a desire for vengeance against the Allied forces he held responsible for expanding the conflict. By December 1943, Franz Stigler was a veteran of 487 combat missions, having been shot down 17 times himself, bailing out 6 times and landing damaged aircraft 11 times. He was an instructor pilot, even teaching future ace Gerhard Barkhorn. Stationed in Europe, he primarily flew the Messerschmitt Bf 109. On this particular day, he had already achieved 2 aerial victories, bringing his total confirmed kills to 27. Just one more kill, a 4-engine bomber, would earn him the coveted Knight's Cross. Meanwhile, Second Lieutenant Charles L. Charlie Brown, a 21-year-old American pilot from Weston, Lewis County, West Virginia, was at the controls of his B-17F Flying Fortress, Ye Old Pub. This was Charlie Brown's first combat mission as an aircraft commander. His crew, part of the 527th Bomb Squadron of the 379th Bomb Group of the United States Army Air Forces, USAAF, had taken off from RAF Kimbolton, England. Their target was the Focke-Wulf 190 aircraft production facility in Bremen, Germany. The 379th Bomb Group was known to fly more sorties and drop more bomb tonnage than any other group in the 8th Air Force. Charlie Brown's crew was assigned to fly in Purple Heart Corner, a position on the edge of the bomber formation considered highly dangerous due to its vulnerability to German attacks. The odds were already stacked against them. 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock. The mission to Bremen was known to be perilous. Briefings indicated that the American bomber formations could expect to encounter hundreds of German fighters, and Bremen itself was defended by over 250 flak guns. The freezing air at altitude, with outside temperatures plummeting to -60 degrees Celsius, -76 degrees Fahrenheit, added another layer of extreme difficulty, threatening both men and machines. No one believed it was possible to survive a direct hit from such heavy defenses and a concentrated fighter assault. They were about to be proven catastrophically wrong. As Charlie Brown's B-17F, Ye Old Pub, began its 10-minute bomb run at an altitude of 8,320 meters, 27,300 feet, the German defenses unleashed their fury. Flak explosions blossomed around the formation, violent and precise. Before the bomber could release its full bomb load, a direct hit shattered its plexiglass nose, transforming the cockpit into a wind-lashed, freezing cavern. The No. 2 engine was immediately knocked out, its propeller windmilling uselessly. The No. 4 engine, already in questionable condition, sustained further damage and had to be throttled back to prevent it from overspeeding and tearing itself apart. The damage was crippling. The loss of power forced Ye Olde Pub to slow dramatically, making it impossible for Charlie Brown to maintain his position within the tightly packed bomber formation. He fell back, becoming a straggler, a lone target in the vast, hostile sky. This isolated position was a death sentence for most crews. The B-17, designed as a flying fortress, relied heavily on the mutual defensive fire of its formation. Alone, it was a wounded beast. Almost immediately, the crippled B-17 came under sustained attack from a swarm of German fighters. Over a dozen enemy aircraft, a combination of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s F. Rom JG-11, swarmed the bomber for more than 10 minutes. The assault was relentless. The No. 3 engine was hit, its power reduced to only half. This meant the aircraft was operating at best with only 40% of its total rated power. The bomber's internal systems began to fail. The oxygen supply, vital at such high altitudes, was compromised. Hydraulic lines ruptured, spewing fluid and making control surfaces sluggish and unresponsive. Electrical systems shorted, cutting off communications and vital instruments. Half of the rudder and a significant portion of the port, left side, elevator were torn away, making the aircraft incredibly difficult to control. The nose cone was completely missing. Gaping holes riddled the fuselage, exposing the crew to the sub-zero temperatures and the shrieking wind. Inside the bomber, chaos reigned. The tail gunner, Staff Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode, was killed instantly. His body slumped over his guns, his blood freezing into icicles. All but one of the remaining 9 crew members were either wounded or incapacitated by the extreme cold and oxygen deprivation. Charlie Brown himself took a bullet fragment to his right shoulder. The morphine syringes, desperately needed for the severely wounded, were frozen solid. Despite the catastrophic damage, the B-17, known for its resilience, somehow continued to fly. Charlie Brown, struggling with his own injuries and the failing controls, fought to keep the aircraft airborne. The bomber's 11 defensive guns were largely useless. The extreme cold had rendered all but the 2 top turret guns and 1 forward-firing nose gun inoperable. The situation was dire. Survival seemed impossible. 8:32:00. The B-17, a broken bird, plunged from its bombing altitude. Oxygen-starved and wounded, Charlie Brown momentarily lost consciousness, and the aircraft spiraled violently towards the ground. The attacking German fighters, believing their target was finished, broke off their assault, leaving the bomber to its seemingly inevitable fate. This unintended consequence of Charlie Brown's blackout bought him precious seconds. At less than 1,000 feet above the German countryside, the lower altitude provided slightly more oxygen, rousing Charlie Brown back to a hazy awareness. He found Ye Olde Pub, inverted, plummeting towards the earth. With a surge of adrenaline and sheer will, he grappled with the unresponsive controls, fighting against the shattered rudder and elevator. At a mere 3,000 feet, just above the rooftops of Oldenburg, he managed to pull the bomber out of its dive, leveling it precariously. The aircraft was a wreck, but it was flying. Charlie Brown now set a course for England, a desperate 250-mile journey across hostile territory and the unforgiving North Sea. His only operable guns were the top turret and one in the nose. The radio was dead, communication impossible. The crew members who could still move were frantically tending to their wounded comrades, but the situation was grim. They were alone, exposed, and vulnerable. As Ye Olde Pub limped on, losing altitude, it passed low over a German airfield near Kloppenburg. On the ground, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler was refueling his Messerschmitt Bf-109 G6. He had just returned from downing 2 B-17s earlier that day, bringing his personal tally to 27 victories. One more 4-engine bomber kill would secure him the Knight's Cross, a medal he deeply desired, not just as an award, but as a symbol of purpose in his fighting. Franz Stigler saw the American bomber. It was an easy target, practically begging to be finished. He jumped into his Bf-109, his engine already running, eager to claim his 28th victory. As he took off, he noticed a .50 caliber Browning machine gun bullet embedded in his radiator, a souvenir from an earlier engagement. It risked engine overheating, but the chance for the Knight's Cross spurred him on. He quickly caught up to "Ye Old Pub." He maneuvered his Messerschmitt into a firing position, preparing to deliver the final blows. He expected the American tail gunner to open fire, a standard defensive action. But no shots came. As he drew closer, he saw why. Through gaping holes torn in the bomber's airframe by flak and machine gun fire, Franz Stigler could see the devastation inside. The tail gunner was dead, slumped motionless at his station. He saw injured crew members, some incapacitated, others frantically trying to assist their wounded comrades. The sheer scale of the damage was unprecedented in his experience. He later described it as the most heavily damaged aircraft he had ever seen that was still flying. A profound internal conflict gripped Franz Stigler. His training, his duty, and the promise of the Knight's Cross all demanded he shoot down this helpless enemy. But his father's words echoed in his mind, and the unwritten code of honor among pilots, a code that recognized the shared perils of aerial combat, stirred within him. "You follow the rules of war for you, not for your enemy," his former commanding officer, Lieutenant Gustav Rodel, had once told him. "You fight by rules to keep your humanity." To shoot down these half-dead people, as he later thought, felt like murder, not combat. He decided he could not fire. Franz Stigler flew his Bf-109 alongside the battered B-17, so close that Charlie Brown and his co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Spencer, Pinky, Luke, could clearly see the German pilot's face. Panic surged through the American cockpit. "My God, this is a nightmare," Pinky Luke reportedly exclaimed. Charlie Brown believed they were seconds from being destroyed. But the German pilot did not attack. Instead, he made a series of hand gestures, signaling to Charlie Brown. Franz Stigler initially tried to motion for Charlie Brown to land the B-17 at a nearby German airfield, suggesting surrender. This would ensure the crew received medical care and became prisoners of war, rather than perishing in the crippled bomber. However, exhausted, wounded, and unable to interpret the gestures, Charlie Brown kept his course, determined to reach England. What does it tell you about a man that he made that choice with everything to lose? Tell me in the comments. Realizing that Charlie Brown was not going to land, Franz Stigler made another decision. He would escort the American bomber. He positioned his Messerschmitt on the B-17's port side, flying in close formation. On the ground, German anti-aircraft gunners, manning batteries along the North Sea coast, observed the approaching aircraft. Their radar and visual spotters, trained to identify enemy silhouettes, clearly saw a B-17 Flying Fortress, a prime target for their flak guns. Yet, flying in tight formation beside the American bomber was a Messerschmitt Bf-109. German ground controllers, receiving reports of the unusual pairing, issued urgent queries. Was this a captured Allied aircraft? Was it a damaged German bomber being escorted by a fighter? The standard procedure was to fire on any Allied aircraft in their airspace. However, the presence of their own fighter, a familiar Bf-109, created immediate confusion. Orders were delayed, challenged, and re-evaluated. The gunners, seeing the unmistakable profile of a Luftwaffe fighter, held their fire, unwilling to risk hitting one of their own. This split-second hesitation, born of confusion and the established visual recognition protocols, allowed the two aircraft to pass through the heavily defended coastal zone unmolested. The German High Command, if they had known the true nature of the escort, would have seen it as an act of treason. Franz Stigler's extraordinary escort continued for several miles, past the coastal defenses and out over the frigid North Sea. He continued to gesture, this time pointing north, urging Charlie Brown to fly towards neutral Sweden. In Sweden, the crew would be interned, but safe, and receive immediate medical attention. Again, Charlie Brown did not understand, or perhaps, in his oxygen-deprived state, simply could not process the German pilot's intentions. He maintained his course, heading directly for England. Franz Stigler remained with Ye Old Pub for approximately 10 minutes, guiding it away from danger. He flew close, ensuring no other German fighters or ground batteries would engage the crippled bomber. The American crew, initially terrified, now watched in stunned disbelief as their enemy became their protector. As they cleared German-occupied territory and were well out over the open water, Franz Stigler concluded his escort. He knew he could go no further without risking his own life and a court-martial for treason. He pulled his Messerschmitt alongside the B-17 one last time. Charlie Brown looked across at the German pilot. Franz Stigler raised his gloved hand in a crisp salute. Then, he rolled his Bf-109 over, executed a tight turn, and disappeared back towards the east, returning to his base. The American crew could hardly believe what had just transpired. Their enemy, a German ace, had not only spared them but had actively protected them. Charlie Brown continued his struggle across the 250 miles of the storm-tossed North Sea. The B-17, Ye Old Pub, with its single dead engine, one failing engine, and severely damaged control surfaces, miraculously remained airborne. The crew, battered and exhausted, fought for every mile. If you had been given that order, would you have followed it? Tell me in the comments. The journey across the North Sea was a grueling test of endurance. The airframe, riddled with Veer 2000 bullet and shrapnel holes, groaned under the strain. The biting cold seeped into every corner of the aircraft, exacerbating the injuries of the crew. Bombardier 2nd Lieutenant Robert Andrews, Navigator 2nd Lieutenant Al Sadak, Flight Engineer, Top Turret Gunner Staff Sergeant Bertrand Frenchy Coulomb, Radio Operator Technical Sergeant Dick Pichout, Ball Turret Gunner Staff Sergeant Sam Blackford, and Waist Gunner Staff Sergeant Lloyd Jennings, all wounded, clung to life. Another waist gunner, Sergeant Alex Yelisenko, was also wounded and would later die from his injuries. Charlie Brown, his shoulder throbbing, fought the controls, coaxing every last bit of performance from the dying engines. The plane vibrated violently, threatening to tear itself apart. Every gust of wind, every slight movement of the controls was a battle. The oxygen system was barely functioning, forcing the crew to breathe shallowly, constantly battling hypoxia. The silence in the radio room was deafening, isolating them further in their desperate fight for survival. As they approached the English coast, the exhausted crew scanned the horizon for any sign of home. The thought of being shot down by friendly fire, after surviving such an ordeal, was a terrifying prospect. But the sight of the familiar coastline, even under a gray winter sky, brought a surge of hope. The B-17, with its remaining operable engines sputtering, finally reached land. Charlie Brown managed to guide the crippled bomber to an emergency landing at RAF Seething, near the English coast, the home of the 448th Bomb Group. The landing was rough but successful. The aircraft, number 42-3167, nicknamed Ye Old Pub, had survived. Upon landing, the full extent of the damage became horrifyingly clear. The plane was a sieve, barely held together by sheer will and the B-17's legendary toughness. The ground crew stared in disbelief. How could this aircraft have flown? 8 of the 10 crew members returned to duty, a testament to their resilience and the care of their comrades. Sadly, tail gunner Hugh Eckenrode was confirmed killed in action, and waist gunner Alex Yelisenko later succumbed to his wounds. Charlie Brown and his crew were debriefed on their mission, including the inexplicable encounter with the German fighter pilot. For reasons unknown, the debriefing was classified, secret, and remained so for many years. The notion of an honorable German pilot not shooting down a damaged American bomber simply did not align with the narrative the USAAF wished to convey. Someone decided you can't be human and be flying in a German cockpit, Charlie Brown later reflected. Franz Stigler, too, kept silent about the incident. In Nazi Germany, sparing an enemy while in combat was a court-martial offense, potentially leading to execution. His act of mercy, a profound personal decision, had to remain a secret to protect his own life. Which side of this story do you think history got wrong? Tell me in the comments. The war continued for both men. Charlie Brown went on to complete a full combat tour, flying additional missions. He finished college, accepted a regular commission, and served in various Air Force and State Department assignments, including the Office of Special Investigations and with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, before retiring. His experiences shaped his view of warfare, but the memory of the German pilot stayed with him, a perplexing and powerful anomaly in the brutality of war. Franz Stigler continued to fly for the Luftwaffe, engaging in further desperate aerial battles. He survived the war, a decorated ace with 28 confirmed victories. He was appointed Staffelkapitän, squadron leader of 12. Staffel of JG-27 on January 13, 1944. He later flew with Jagdverband 44, JV-44, a unit of elite pilots flying the revolutionary Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter. Despite the intense pressure and the increasing desperation of the German war effort, Franz Stigler never forgot the B-17 and its struggling crew. The image of the wounded men through the torn fuselage remained vivid in his memory. He often wondered if the bomber and its crew had made it back to England. The war's end brought devastation to Germany and a new life for Franz Stigler. He moved to Canada in 1953, where he built a successful business and a new life. Yet, the memory of that day, December 20, 1943, lingered. It was a secret he carried, a testament to a moment of humanity in the midst of unimaginable conflict. He often recounted the story to close friends and family, but never publicly, knowing the potential repercussions even decades later. 32.0038.00. Decades passed. The world moved on, but for Charlie Brown, the unanswered question of the German pilot became a personal quest. In 1985, at the 50th anniversary of the B-17, Charlie Brown shared his story publicly for the first time. He had searched military archives in the US and England for 4 years, but found no record of the German pilot. He even wrote to Adolf Galland, a prominent German flying ace, hoping for a lead. Finally, in 1990, Charlie Brown placed an advertisement in a newsletter for former German fighter pilots, recounting the incident and asking if anyone recognized the story of the pilot who saved his life on December 20, 1943. On January 18, 1990, a letter arrived at Charlie Brown's home in Florida. He opened it with trembling hands. It began, "Dear Charles, all these years I wondered what happened to that B-17, did she make it home? Did her crew survive their wounds? To hear of your survival has filled me with indescribable joy." The letter was signed, Franz Stigler. Franz Stigler, then living in Vancouver, British Columbia, had seen the newsletter article. He described his plane, the specific maneuvers he made, and the salute, confirming every detail Charlie Brown needed to know. He explained his internal struggle, the decision not to fire, and his efforts to guide the bomber to safety. Charlie Brown, overwhelmed with emotion, could not wait. He immediately called Directory Assistance for Vancouver, found Franz Stigler's number, and dialed. "My God, it's you!" Charlie Brown reportedly shouted, tears streaming down his face, as Franz Stigler answered. Their first in-person meeting took place later that year, on June 21, 1990, in the lobby of a Florida hotel. Both men, now elderly, looked like retired businessmen. They embraced, weeping and laughing, a half-century of unspoken history collapsing into a single, powerful moment. They spoke about their encounter, reliving those tense minutes high above Germany, but this time with understanding and a shared bond. When asked what he thought of Charlie Brown, Franz Stigler, his square jaw tightening, fought back tears and simply said, in heavily accented English, "I love you, Charlie." 38.00 End. From that moment, enemies became brothers. Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler forged an extraordinary friendship that lasted for 18 years, until their deaths in 2008, just 8 months apart. They took fishing trips together, flew cross-country to visit each other's homes, and traveled to schools and veterans reunions to share their unique story. Their wives, Jackie Brown and Haya Stigler, also became friends. Charlie Brown's daughter, Dawn Warner, noted how her father would constantly check on Franz Stigler's health, a deep concern born of their profound connection. The incident, initially a secret held by both pilots, became a powerful testament to humanity, ethics, and morals in the midst of total war. It challenged the prevailing narrative of absolute enemy dehumanization and highlighted the individual choices that can transcend the brutality of conflict. Franz Stigler's act of chivalry, risking his own life and freedom for an enemy crew, remains one of the most remarkable acts of compassion recorded during World War II. The events of December 20, 1943, illustrate that even within the rigid structures of military command and the intense hatred of war, individual conscience and a personal code of honor can prevail. The story of Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown is a poignant reminder that the shared experience of combat, the inherent dangers of the skies, could sometimes foster an unexpected sense of brotherhood among pilots, regardless of their allegiance. An unexpected fact about Ye Old Pub is that after its miraculous return and subsequent repairs, it never flew in action again. It was eventually returned to the USA in April 1944 and later sold for scrap metal in August 1945 by the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. The bomber, a silent witness to an extraordinary act of mercy, survived the war only to be broken down and recycled, its incredible story initially hidden, much like the secret shared by its pilot and his German guardian angel. If this story moved you, if you think these men deserve to be remembered, leave one word in the comments: honor. Subscribe for a new forgotten story every week.